down some of the tips, I think it's worthwhile touching on sleep apnea under the context of sleep disorders because it's so pervasive. And I'm sure you probably find many patients who think that they're doing everything right, but sleep apnea in particular being one of the biggest disorders that's impacting people's sleep. So we mentioned that a lot of people know of like sleep apnea and think of an overweight, often male, who is wearing a machine, sleep apnea machine. But there's this whole subclassification of even healthy people who are dealing with a lot of sleep apnea. Do you see a lot of those in your clinic?
We see a lot of sleep disorders, yes, and it frequently surprises us. Yeah, younger, non-male, non-overweight, and I think that there's a lot of it can be a lot of correlation with other conditions, other health conditions too.
Did you read the book Breath by James Nestor?
Love that book.
Yeah,
such a good book.
I'll just chime. We've had him on the podcast before, but one of the big things that he's saying is that the reason that we're having so much disordered sleeping, and sleep disorders is a big thing. There's a lot of different things that fall into it. But the narrowing of the jaws and that impacting our ability to sleep properly. And actually, as part of landing that plane, our mouth and our tongue getting into the right position and allowing us to breathe properly.
Yeah.
And when we're breathing through the nose and our tongue is pinned to the roof of the mouth, we're much more likely to be breathing properly, which allows good sleep. And when we're not, and our tongue is flappy or our tongue is too big for our mouth, which our jaw is too small, that can cause a lot of issues. And then some people have a tongue tie that was never corrected. Anything else you want to say on the jaw sleep connection, sleep apnea connection?
Yeah, no, great points. If you haven't read James Nestor's book, and I've heard it both ways, whether breath or breathe, the title, but just an incredibly well-researched, really fast-paced, really fun book to read. And there's a lot of factors there that he talks about that are not in our control, right? It's evolutionary, in part, the shape of our skulls as we went from being, walking around on 4 legs up to standing up on our feet and legs, and then the growth of the brain, and then how that pushed the nasal cavity forward. So a lot of that, contributes to the mouth structure and the narrowing of the airway, but there's a lot that is in our control, and, pretty interesting things around breastfeeding, right? So, duration of breastfeeding is definitely associated with development of the whole oral cavity and the strength and the tone of the muscles and the tongue also, which then sets you up later in life to have less airway issues. Same with, what are we feeding ourselves as children or feeding our kids, and what are we eating ourselves? And if we're eating a really soft processed food diet and we're not chewing our food carefully, we're not developing these muscles, which are also important for keeping that airway open. I think that happened to
me. I have a very narrow jaw, and I've been, working with dentists.
Yeah.
I have a dental appliance.
Yeah, like
at
an ALF
night.
or a...
It's a custom made one. There's a dentist over here in LA
block.
that to expand my palate because my jaw was narrow, and it wasn't really an issue growing up. I didn't notice it too much. I always slept great. I didn't have any sort of sleep apnea type things. But then something maybe happened in my late 30s where I started to notice that it was creating a lot of almost TMJ type symptoms. And then I went in and got referred to this dentist, and he created this dental appliance. And around the same time, from another dentist, Dr. Mark Bahena, who's up in the Bay Area. I don't know if you guys have met each other, but he was the one that really got me into mouth taping, which has been a total game changer.
Yeah.
For me at night, and we've done episodes and other things on that. So
so if we're breathing through our mouth as opposed to our nose, the nasal tissue actually gets more swollen and boggy, and then it sort of propagates that cycle. It gets harder. It keeps
and we're not producing nitric oxide when we're breathing through our mouth, and a whole bunch of other things.
So one other thing, and then we can move on. But like the other thing I think is really interesting, and pretty rapidly, we've seen problems with airways around screen use. And so, because our posture should really be like a J-shaped posture, straight and then kind of curved into the bottom, from like this. Whereas if we're on our screens and we're, kind of, you've seen everyone with like screen neck, right? Where we're kind of tipping forward.
Tech neck, right?
Yeah. And that's creating an S-shaped curve, which further closes off the airway.
Wow.
Right? So another thing you can do is, posture is incredibly important. Sitting up straight, keeping your shoulders back, standing with your head, almost like you had a plumb line dropped from the crown of your head all the way down through your shoulders, your diaphragm, your hips, your knees, your feet. So you have a nice straight posture there.
Which it feels like, a lot of people try to work on posture during the day, but I found that in my anecdotal, just watching people, really, if you want to fix your posture, it's walking more in life, like not sitting as much, and then working out.
Core.
Because if you work out,
core
work, but also strengthening your shoulders, that's naturally going to lift you up and not so much tension that's going to be there.